afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Ashley Ferry, and I'm the Cat Foster Manager at Austin Pets Alive. So today I'll be discussing how to start and manage a cat foster program. So just to start with, a little bit about me. I've grown up with animals as part of my family, so naturally I've always loved them. I actually grew up as a dog person, so if you are dog people, do not fret. You can learn cats. They're not that hard. Up until 2 years ago, I actually never had a cat. So it's been a quick learning experience. As for my background, I attended the University of Texas at Austin and received a Bachelor of Business Administration degree in marketing. So I've performed several marketing internships, starting with one of our local branches of government, Travis County. And then I figured out how to combine my education with my love of animals, and I interned with Austin Humane Society and then moved into interning with Austin Pets Alive. So I have a lot of experience with different shelters and their methods. After my graduation from UT, I was asked to stay on at APA as the cat marketing manager, and then I moved into the role that I currently hold, cat foster manager. So what we'll cover today, we'll start with how to recruit fosters and move into how to screen those fosters so that you can make sure that these are going to be safe homes for your animals. Once you have a group of fosters, we'll discuss how to communicate your foster needs to them and place cats in their care. The next step will be tracking these animals once they're in foster homes and following up with the fosters to make sure that everything is progressing well. This is all a huge task, so we'll then also look at what type of volunteer teams you can create to make it all manageable. And no matter how well you're screening everyone and doing all of these other steps, you'll inevitably run into a few problems. So we'll also look at how to handle some of those problem fosters. And then finally, I've left a lot of time for questions and answers because I'm sure fostering is one of those things that's a little difficult to fully comprehend, so I'm sure there are lots of questions. Okay, so first we need to find these fosters. Reaching out to the community is going to be your number one thing. There are bound to be tons of animal lovers in your community, but not everyone knows what fostering is or that it's even an option. So it's our jobs to go out there and educate them. Posting on Craigslist and social media does a really good job of getting the word out there pretty broadly. If you want to set up flyers, you can do a little bit more specific targeting. You know, maybe you want to focus on neighborhoods with houses so you don't have to deal with pet restrictions and all that stuff. Or maybe you want to focus on pet stores, so you're already targeting people that you know like pets. If you're looking for more medically trained fosters, reaching out to vet and vet tech programs, it'll be a really great experience for the students to get more hands-on learning, and it helps your organization save lives. Another great way to kind of attract fosters is to offer community service hours for fostering. A lot of organizations require members to accrue community service hours, and fostering is a great way to do it in the comfort of your own home while playing with cute little animals. So right here, oh, I also brought a laser pointer. Please don't rush the screen. There you go. So right there is our breakdown of how we distribute hours per different types of fosters, because different kittens and cats are going to require different amounts of care. Obviously, bottle baby kittens, so much more time intensive than, a healthy adult. And you don't just want to purposely look for fosters, you also want to just incorporate it in everything you're doing. If you have adoption events or community events, bring flyers and foster information with you. It's not a bad place to try to recruit fosters. On our adoption replies for adoption inquiries, we have this little blurb right there that encourages people to potentially sign up to foster. And with how many adoption inquiries you get, just adding a blurb to your emails is so simple, and it reaches out to tons of people. You can also encourage your adoption staff, if you have a facility, to educate the public on fostering. They get a really good idea of what these visitors are looking for, And a lot of times people come into the shelter not quite ready to adopt. They just kind of want to look. They're not sure that adopting is right for them. And fostering is kind of a way for them to try it out without making that commitment. And another really great tool that we started utilizing in our shelter is special cage cards for the animals that need foster and we're looking for foster, just to indicate that, you know, you could foster this one. And it doesn't necessarily always find that animal fostered through the cage card, but it does pique more people's interest in fostering, and then it starts the conversation going. So once you have some interest built up, you need to have an application. You don't want just any person off the street to be taking home your animals because you don't know anything about them. And a foster application is always a really great place to start. I would strongly recommend an online application. They're easy to create, they can be found really easily by the people trying to fill them out, and you don't have any pesky legibility issues like if they're filling out a form freehand. You will want to ask some basic questions in order to gather the applicant's contact info, their address and stuff, get an idea of their experience with animals, and find out more about their living situation. Do they currently have other pets? Do they maybe have a feline leukemia cat? That's a big deal for you, deciding who goes there. Do they need to pay a pet deposit? Does their apartment have special restrictions? All of these things factor into what animals they can foster, so you want to find that out. It's also extremely important to include a liability waiver on your application. You never intend to send an animal to foster that might potentially harm them, their animals, or their property, but when you're dealing with animals, you just can't guarantee that that's not going to happen. And so this is part of our liability waiver, and they're required to electronically sign it when they fill out the foster application. And that way, we're just not held liable in case something goes wrong. Kind of protects everyone. And once you've received a completed application, you then need to screen the person. Just because they filled out the application doesn't mean that they're good to go. This can be as extensive as you deem fit. For us, we do a web search on them to make sure that they're not on any sort of like animal abuse registries or anything like that, that nothing weird comes up like on their Facebook page or anything. And then we go ahead and call them. And we go over their foster application, make sure that everything they submitted was correct, and ask questions if there's anything that doesn't really make sense. Like, you really put that your apartment complex doesn't require a pet deposit. They usually do, so you can follow up about that. And then once that's done, we go ahead and tell them a little bit more about fostering with us, how the clinic process works, marketing animals for adoption, etc. Other organizations will do like vet checks, references, and all sorts of stuff, which is totally up to you. It is just important to keep in mind when you're doing that, though, that you have to be a little bit more understanding about the circumstances that the applicant is living in. We have a lot of UT students that apply to foster with us because, they grew up with animals and they know how to take care of animals, but they don't have an animal right now, so they don't have a vet to give a reference. Or maybe people have never had pets, and that shouldn't necessarily rule them out to be fosters because you want to teach them about animals, and these will be your future adopters as long as you help cultivate that relationship. So finding out where their pet experience lies is more about telling you how much support they'll need than necessarily ruling them out. So, okay, we have our approved fosters. Now we need to tell them what cats need them. Email groups are going to be your easiest method of communication, and they're super easy to set up. And fosters have a lot more control over how they're being contacted. If they don't want to foster anymore, they can just unsubscribe. If they don't want to get a bazillion emails from you a day, they can set that as one of their settings. You don't have to deal with removing people from the list and all that stuff. Plus, everyone knows how to use Yahoo groups or Google groups. Probably more Google groups. Yahoo groups is kind of old now. But it's something that everyone's familiar with. You know how to sign up for, and it's super easy to create. Once you have everyone gathered in a group, emailing out foster pleas is going to be super efficient. With one email, you can reach 100 people. In your foster pleas, you want to make sure that you're providing all of the information you have, like the cat's age, if it has any behavior issues or medical issues, if they're good with other cats or dogs or anything like that, that can be very important. And you definitely want to tell fosters if they have a deadline. Our city shelter will give us a deadline to pull the animal by, and so we make sure that our fosters know about that so that they can step up before that deadline approaches. Now, if your city shelter collects owner surrender info, that can be extremely helpful, and if they don't, it might be something you might want to start talking to them about trying to do, because a lot of cats do really bad in the shelter. But that's not really a very good example of how they are in a home. They might be perfectly nice in a home, and they just hate the shelter. So if you know that they're nice in a home, or that they're good with kids, or whatever the owner related to them, then you can let fosters know to kind of expect that when they bring them home. And although pictures aren't as essential in foster pleas as they are for like adoption and stuff, fosters are way more likely to respond if you have a picture. It doesn't even have to be a great picture. Like, it could be the cage, bars, and everything, but they just kind of want to know what the cat looks like. And you do want to disclose a lot of info in your foster pleas, but you don't want to just have it in like a format that is consistent all the time. That gets really boring to read. So you do want to be a little bit more creative in how you're framing these cats. A lot of them do need foster for the same reason, whether it's socialization or medical or whatever. So it gets easy to get kind of stuck in that rut where you're like, 8-week-old socialization kitten, please take it home. But you're not going to get as great of a response if you're not giving them a little bit more info or trying to jazz it up a little bit. So now you've sent your foster plea. People have answered, they're ready to take the cat. How do we get it from up there in the shelter into their home? First, you want to make sure it's a good fit. We require that our fosters isolate their foster animals for 10 to 14 days, just to make sure that the cat itself is healthy. A lot of times that transition from shelter to foster home can be really stressful on them, and if they had any starting germs of a URI, it just flares. So you thought you brought home a healthy cat, but then the next day it's not really healthy. You don't want to expose the foster's resident animals to that. Plus, this is just the proper way to introduce a new cat to a home. You don't just automatically throw 2 cats face to face. You have the scent profiles and everything. So this definitely helps also with the stressed out cats, because if they're just introduced to a whole new home, it's way too much space for them. But if they start out in like a bathroom or a spare room, they feel more secure and they can kind of adapt to their new surroundings. And then going back to the owner surrender info, you can also find out, do they have a history of being good with dogs? Is it known that they hate kids? And then you can ask the foster if they have other pets or kids in their house to make sure that everything's going to work out fine. You don't want to put a cat that hates kids in a home with a 2-year-old and get someone bit. Now, as some of y'all were here for the medical presentation, Ellen and Jordana mentioned that we do isolate feline leukemia cats from non-feline leukemia cats. So for us, that's a big deal, and we always want to find out if there are any feline leukemia cats involved. If the foster has feline leukemia cats, we only want them to foster feline leukemia cats, because we don't want to send them a non-feline leukemia cat, and then they get it. And same goes the other way. If the foster only has non-feline leukemia cats at home, we don't want them to take a feline leukemia cat, because we don't want to give their resident cat feline leukemia. So that's always a question that we want to make sure of, that everyone's going to be good. Next, you need to find out if the foster is going to be willing to handle any types of medical needs that the cat has or behavior problems that you know about. If the kitten needs socialization, are they prepared to do that? Have they done it before? Or do you need to give them more information about it, make sure that they're going to be able to give that cat the time that it needs? If it has medical care, a lot of cats just have simple oral meds, and that's not a big deal. A lot of fosters can just pick that up by you telling them how to do it. But some cats do need sub-Q fluids or Pen-G or something injectable. And a lot of fosters are actually willing to learn how to do it, but they don't know how to do it themselves. They haven't had to do it before. So if you have the capabilities to teach them how to do it, then they're willing to take the animal. So you don't necessarily have to look for a foster that has those skills already. You can definitely teach them how to get to that point. And then you have to look at where the cat's coming from. Are you sending the foster directly to the city shelter to pick the cat up? If so, then you need to have a relationship with that city shelter so that you can tell them when someone's coming and what animal they're allowed to pick up. You don't want people just showing up there and picking up animals and saying that it's for your organization. It'll be a huge mess. Obviously, it's going to be much easier if they're coming to your facility to pick up the animal, because then they're just interacting with your staff, your volunteers, and it's not really involving an outside shelter. Now, if they're picking up a foster cat from another foster, then it's easier to just connect the two fosters rather than trying to act as the middleman, because you don't know each of their schedules. You can't set a time for them to meet, but they can bounce back and forth, and saves a whole lot of emails. So now the animal's in the foster home, and we have to have some way to keep track of where all these animals are. Otherwise, it's going to be crazy. The big thing is that you want to keep everything consistent and updated. We use PetPoint and Google Sheets. In our Google Sheets, we just have a spreadsheet, and it has tons of information, which we'll go over in the next slide. But because we have two sources of where the animal's location is set, we always need to make sure that when we update one, we update the other. If they have conflicting information, it gets really confusing, and no one really knows which one's right. So on our spreadsheet, there are several columns that are pretty important. Of course, you want some general information about the cat, its ID number, age, coloring, etc., which becomes even more important when you start getting multiple cats with the same name, because that gets a little bit harder to distinguish who's who. It also helps to note why the cat is in foster and track how long it's been in foster. These can often give you red flags of I sent this 8-week-old kitten to foster and it's been there for 100 days. What's going on? It shouldn't have really taken it that long to socialize. So you can check in with the foster and find out what's happening. Is it already socialized and you're just not really wanting to give it back? It's a great way to figure out where your issues are. And then it also has all of the foster's info listed. As I mentioned, we use PetPoint. So you have to look up the animal, and then it tells you where it's at. And then you have to look up the person, and then you can get the contact info. With our spreadsheet, we just have everything listed in one place, so it just takes out all of those extra steps. And then, because everything is all in one place, it's also a really great spot to keep notes about your check-ins. Again, just keeping everything in one spot. So you don't have to go back and look through all of your emails to find out the latest update on this cat. It's all right there. And once it's set up, you want to make sure that you have it accessible to everyone. This doesn't mean that everyone has to have editing privileges, but at least they can view it. For us, that includes our staff, our foster team volunteers, and even our adoption volunteers that reply to adoption inquiries. They have access to view it, just because, like I said, it's so much easier to get the foster's contact info from the spreadsheet than it is from our database. And as long as you have a way to track your fosters, following up with them once they have a cat is not that difficult, but it is very important. We always start with an introduction email, and it's basically the same format. It will contain some content specific to the cat, such as its ID number, date of birth. if it's been spayed or neutered yet, and when it's due for vaccines. It also contains some general fostering info that really doesn't change, such as how to schedule medical appointments, submit marketing material, and all of that stuff. Although you could easily just send fosters the normal organizational info that doesn't change once, like when they're approved and be done, we find that a lot of the fosters prefer not to have to look back through their email. So then they'll just email us and ask. And so if you're providing this info more frequently, say every time they take a new cat, then it's a little bit less likely to get all of those inquiries. They have the information a little bit more readily available. And this introduction email provides a great way to open dialogue with the foster. You know, they've had the cat now for like a night, should be settling in some. You can ask how it's doing, make sure it's eating, see if there are any signs of illness. And it gives them a clear path of who they're supposed to contact. Which, I know we all get swamped with emails, but it's definitely much better to have the fosters emailing you about their uncertainties than just guessing. Also, this email is very easy to just set up as a canned response. The structure and the overall information kind of stays the same. You just kind of have an area where you edit the specific cat's info. So it's really not a very difficult or time-intensive task. After they've had the cat for a couple weeks, you want to follow up and maintain check-ins. The check-ins are a bit more personalized and tend to focus a bit more on why the cat's in foster. So you'll check on how's its socialization progress going? Is it over that URI yet? These are also really great times to make sure that all of the cat's organizational needs are being met. Is it scheduled to come in for that next vaccine? Are you working on submitting marketing material? And you'll also want to generally check in on them about every 2 to 4 weeks after that point. But this really depends on the animal and why it's in foster. If you have an animal that's been in foster forever, and it's going to be in foster forever, like a hospice animal or just really bad behavior in the shelter but does great in foster, you probably don't need to check up on them that frequently because, you know, after 2 months, the foster kind of has a better idea of what's going on. So checking in every like 4 weeks or so is fine. When you first send an animal to foster, or you have a kitten or a cat who is working on something, say their socialization, or they're healing a fractured leg, or something along those lines, you want to check in more frequently to make sure progress is being made and that appointments are being kept and all that stuff. So this can all be a lot of work. Luckily, you can create teams of volunteers to help make it all possible. You definitely want a team of foster mentors. These are often people who are a bit more experienced fosters. They know how the system works, and they understand what fostering is like, so they're willing to help others get to that point too. They're amazing for doing the check-ins and answering foster questions because, you know, they've already been there. They know how to do that. Many of them might have specialties too. Most of your fosters probably have specialties. They usually foster kittens, or they usually foster ringworm, or whatever they do. So a lot of the mentors follow along those lines too, which makes it really easy to help split up the animals that you have in foster by the mentor's specialty so that they can get to know those animals a bit better than, you know, your cat foster manager who's managing a program with 300 cats. It's a lot of individual animals to get to know. And some examples of the specialties might be kittens, feline leukemia, behavior, socialization, medical, ringworm, etc. And again, these different types of cats kind of have different needs. For instance, ringworm cats need to get oral meds and they need to get lime dipped. And if your mentor is already telling 20 other people this, then it's pretty easy for them to tell one more. Compared to if somebody is really experienced with feline leukemia, explaining the dipping process and the medications is going to be a little bit more time intensive for them. So it's just a bit more efficient to split them up based on specialties. You also want foster screeners. They can be a huge help for your sanity because then you don't have to call a bazillion people all the time. They perform the web searches on your foster applicants. call them to review their application, and provide them with information on fostering with your organization, such as the clinic system, isolating foster cats, keeping foster cats inside only, or whatever other protocols your organization has. Then they make the decision to approve or deny the foster, like right at the end of the conversation, so everyone knows what's going on. Once the foster is approved, then the foster screeners send the relevant emails to go ahead and get them set up in the system and get them started on how to acquire a foster cat. If you're having your spreadsheet and your animal database, that's a lot of stuff to upkeep. So having a team of data coordinators really makes that a little bit more efficient. They're responsible for updating the locations when cats move. And of course, you want to train them to make sure that they update both locations on the spreadsheet and in the database. They will add cats to the spreadsheet when they enter foster and remove them when they leave foster. They basically perform all of the upkeep on your spreadsheet while also doing a bit of data entry when they create new foster profiles in your database. For us, PetPoint, we use that to store our person info as well, so they have to create the person profile, and then it would just depend on what your organization uses. A foster plea team can take care of pleading for foster and placing cats for you. You would want to have each volunteer have a consistent day of the week, so you have your Monday person or your Tuesday person or whatever, and on that day, they're responsible for crafting the foster plea, answering any questions about cats in need of foster, and making arrangements for placement once a foster has been found. Having one email account that the volunteers use and share helps to keep everything in one place and keeps them from receiving a bazillion emails all of the other days of the week that aren't theirs. You do want to keep up with your volunteers, make sure that they're getting constant training, and you just want to be accessible to them as well, because this is a very important position. They're placing the animals in foster care, and you want to make sure that those animals are going to the best possible foster placements for them. Having a spreadsheet with notes about your different fosters can help with making sure that the placements are appropriate fits, and starting the volunteers out with clearing all placements through the cat foster manager can help with getting them in the hang of things. City shelters often have tons of animals, and they're not able to always get you the best information about the animals that you have on deadline. So we also have a team of rescue team evaluators that go to the city shelter and just focus on the animals that are on the attention or at risk list, which are the ones that are like slotted to be euthanized. They visit with the cats, and then they report back to us on their interactions so that we get a bit more behavior info. They'll also try to get better photos of them, because often the city shelter, they're not focused on taking photos of them, they have too many animals. So you have the horrible cage photos or whatever. And a lot of times these might not necessarily be the most amazing photos. It's hard to get an amazing photo of a cat hiding in a feral box, but they're generally a little bit more useful than the ones you can get from the shelter. So again, no matter how well you screen your fosters and set everything else up, you're going to run into problems. These can usually be divided into two groups, delinquent and negligent. So your unresponsive or delinquent fosters, they're usually the ones not submitting marketing material, not taking their kittens in for vaccines on time, and not replying to organization emails. It's important to set up a chain of escalation in these situations. For instance, if your cat marketing team has sent them 3 emails and they're still not replying, they're not submitting marketing material, maybe they need to bounce it up to the cat foster manager to check out what's going on. And through this chain of escalation, you're able to present a united front. Once multiple people in your organization are asking them for the same thing, and they also kind of notice that their unresponsiveness has been observed, then they might just cave and do it. In order for this to be successful, you often want to track your communication with the fosters, which again is where your foster tracking spreadsheet comes in handy. Our primary mode of communication is email, just because it's often the easiest, for us at least. But if that's not working, we will go ahead and try calling them. It's a little harder for fosters to ignore phone calls than it is for them to ignore emails. And if you have not made any progress with escalating it, having more people contacting them, then you need to start working on getting the cat back. You'll want to give the foster a clear deadline, and then to return the cat, and let them know that if you're having trouble, you can send a staff member to go and collect the animal. This also gets into where your liability waiver came in on the foster application. You want to make sure that you note that the animal is your property and that you have the ability to reclaim it at any time. And then you can also tell them that if they do not return the cat by the deadline, you'll be forced to pursue legal action. And because this was included in the liability waiver, you have more grounds to stand on with that. You do not need to specify exactly what the legal action will be. For us, it's generally a legal letter, which does not sound very intimidating. If you don't bring the cat back, we'll send you a letter. So I'd generally stick with the verbiage of, if you don't bring the cat back, we'll pursue legal action. It tends to be a little bit more intimidating sounding, so then they're a little bit more likely to comply. And of course, if none of that works, then actually go ahead and pursue legal action. It is technically your property or the property of your organization, and so you do have the legal right to reclaim it. Sometimes that becomes more work than it might be worth, or more work than your organization is able to put in. So for us, we usually send the legal letter, and if they don't reply within the time specified in the legal letter, then we outcome the cat as stolen. That makes it to where its microchip is marked as stolen, and if at some point the cat does come back, which has actually happened, we've had a foster email us a year later and be like, oh yeah, no, I meant to adopt it and I never got around to it. We'll still let them adopt it. But at least then you don't have this animal lingering in your system, just kind of waiting there. So negligent fosters may also be unresponsive, but they can be a bit more concerning since you know there's a poor level of care. Obviously you don't know this ahead of time though, otherwise you wouldn't have even put the cat in their care. Your response will need to be based on the severity of the issue. For instance, if you have a foster who has just been ignoring your organization's protocols, for instance, with us, if they're letting the foster cat outside, which is a no-no for us, then you might just want to talk to them and tell them, you can't foster unless you agree to comply with our protocols. And if you continue to not comply, then you won't be able to foster at all. Then there's also the circumstances where a foster generally does adult cats, and they're usually pretty awesome about it. But this time they took a tiny kitten. It was more than they could handle. The kitten comes back in not very good shape. Well, you don't necessarily want to lose this awesome foster, but you also don't want to allow that situation to happen again. So in that case, you might just want to restrict them to only doing adults, because obviously kittens don't really work well for them. And then some examples of negligence will just be so horrible that you don't want to give them any more animals ever again. And in that case, it's okay to ban them. Yes, you need foster homes to continue saving animals, but to some extent, you need to make sure that those animals are going to be safe when they're in the foster homes. If they're not going to be safe in those homes, then it's not a good idea to put them there. So as you make these calls, you want to make sure that you keep a listing of which fosters are banned, what their restrictions are, and keep notes on why they're banned or restricted. So that way, you remember 2 years later when they email you randomly and want a foster cat, or your replacement that steps into that role a few years later will understand why that foster is restricted or banned. So in recap, we talked about the different ways to recruit fosters and tie your recruitment efforts into your everyday activities. We then discussed the importance of an application and screening process to make sure that these foster homes are safe for cats in need. Once you have these approved fosters, you need a way to communicate your needs with them, which is where email groups and foster pleas come in. After you send out your plea and a foster steps up to save an animal, you need to make sure it will be a good fit, and you need to plan on how the foster will acquire this animal. You cannot run a foster program with no way of keeping track of where these animals are. So we discussed the significance of tracking your foster cats through a spreadsheet in your organization's animal database. In order to make sure that foster placements are going smoothly, you will want to follow up with the fosters, check in with them periodically to make sure everything's going well. Don't worry though, you don't have to do all of it on your own. There are lots of ways that you can create foster teams to help complete these tasks, such as mentors, screeners, evaluators, and a foster plea team. And then again, even if you're doing everything right, you will always run into some issues. We are dealing with people after all. So we also looked at a couple of different types of problem fosters and ways to deal with them. Okay. And as promised, I left lots of time for Q&A.